Welcome to Becoming, the podcast where we explore the transformative love of Jesus Christ. Join us for heartfelt conversations, real testimonies, and a safe space to laugh and heal together. Whether you're seeking encouragement or a community to connect with, we're here to help you embrace the journey of becoming who you were always meant to be in Christ.
And Katie is my niece, like I've said before in other episodes, and she is just an amazing anointed wife and a mother of three adorable, adorable kids. And so today she's going to share her testimony, how she has come through so many things: addictions, sexual abuse, trauma, just an unstable home life as a child. And so she's going to tell us all about that. So, Katie, I just want to start off by just thanking you for doing this. It's going to mean so much to so many people to hear how you have come through some pretty dark, dark times. So let's just start in your childhood.
Awesome. So my childhood it was pretty simple at first. My dad, he was such a hard worker. He worked so hard to provide for us. It was just me and my two brothers. And we had a really good young life. For me personally, I was the last child. So my older brothers have a little bit different experiences, but I came in a little bit later. But yeah, for me, my dad worked all the time. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, which was such a blessing. And I remember when I was little, we were homeschooled, and she does not remember it this way, but I absolutely loved it. She had like a set schedule for us every day, and we would go on walks and we would go swimming. We lived on the lake in Eufaula, Alabama. And it was just so much fun. It was so much fun. We were living in Eufaula, and my brothers we had kind of family friends. And I think my brothers were learning some not so great things from one of the children in the other family. And because older people had taught him that, no fault of his, but we were all very young. And so that was kind of when we started learning things that we should not have been learning.
Mhm.
That was when I feel like the devil really started to creep into our home. And none of us, obviously, we were so young, none of us were spiritually equipped, or, that wasn't even discussed with us because and I feel like you can attest to this, our whole family is like this. At that time, we didn't really discuss the bad. We just act like nothing was happening, and then, we would move on. And so, plus, we didn't really know that it was bad because
Mm.
that discussion never happened. And so, anyways, other than that, that season of our life, for me personally, was probably one of my favorite out of my whole childhood. It was kind of right before the innocence went away. And we would just play and swim. We lived on a lake in Eufaula, and it was just so much fun. And um, my dad was around a lot more. He still worked hard. He worked a lot, but he didn't work as much as he had to when we moved. And I was a daddy's girl, so I love my
Right.
dad so much. He's awesome. And yeah, so we left Eufaula and we moved back to Enigma, Georgia, which is just a teeny tiny town, which is where my dad was raised. And my granny also lives there, and my granny was actually a Pentecostal preacher. She still is. And she is so important to me. She's a good role model for me. But we moved back to Enigma, and my brother, Will, was my absolute best friend growing up. I called him Bubba. I still call him Bubba. But he was just like my Prince Charming. You know, he was always there for me, always saving me. He would pick me up when I would step in the stickers and he would run me wherever I needed to go. And he would be barefoot. But yeah, and then Michael, poor thing, we tortured him. It was so bad. My daddy taught me how to fight from a very young age. And man, me and Will, we would gang up on him so bad. But now Michael's actually my best friend and I love him so much. He's so important to me. Yeah, so we moved back to Enigma and then Will was, like I said, he was my best friend, but he started getting older and getting into different things and different friends, kind of hanging with the wrong crowds and stuff. So it wasn't long and I didn't really have him anymore. And
Yeah.
so we ended up in 6th grade moving to Washington State. And that was probably the first worst season in my life was when we were in Washington State. Before then, I had seen my parents argue a little bit every now and then, but not really. But we moved up there. And we moved up there because I think my dad was hoping to start fresh and get a good job. And I think that they had heard that it would be better up there. And that just didn't end up being the case. And my dad actually found it really, really hard to find a job up there. My mom started working at McDonald's. So all of a sudden, for the first time in my life at 9 years old, I didn't have my mom. She was working crazy hours. We barely ever saw her. We couldn't afford groceries. I remember one time I got so hungry, and the only thing we had in the fridge was soy sauce, so I drank the bottle of soy sauce.
Oh my goodness. Oh, girl.
But no, but we were fine. You know, Grammy and Grampy, they lived up there. They would bring us stuff from the orchard that they lived on, and, so, yeah, we were not starving by any means, but my dad, he has PTSD from being in the army, and usually in the past, the way that he would cope with that was he would just overwork, and at that time, he couldn't work, so he started playing video games, and he got addicted to these video games, so he was on the computer 24/7.
Mhm.
And my brother, Will, he got a group of friends and he was gone all the time. And me and Michael, we were having a really hard time making friends up there. And I actually had to beat up these little boys on the way home from school one day because they were making fun of Michael's accent because we were from the South. Yeah, we just had a really hard time making friends up there. And so finally, mom and daddy decided that we would move back to Georgia. And so we did, and we moved into a relative's house. He didn't live there anymore, so he let us move there. And it was just a mobile home. It was such a blessing. And so we moved in there. The room that I picked to move into was his son's room. And when I moved in, there was still some stuff in there. And I was going through the stuff and I found a VCR tape. It was a porn tape. And of course, I was curious, so I watched it, and that started a long line of addiction for me in that area. Um, and so I was struggling with that, and when I was 12, I actually was molested by someone who's very close to me, and, that was really shocking to me. I didn't know how to take it, I didn't know what to do with it. I knew it wasn't right. You know, I definitely knew it wasn't right at that point because I was old enough to know. Yeah, so it happened twice in a row at nighttime while my parents were asleep. And my mom was working a lot, and I didn't really know who to tell or what to do or who I should, if I even should tell anyone. And I can remember specifically all throughout the day at school, like not even being able to focus. That was just all I could think about, like wondering. Why? What did I do? Is it because of how I was dressing? Is it because of how I was acting? Why did this happen? And how can I prevent it from happening again? Because at this point, it was 2 nights in a row. Because I remember after the first night, I was like, "Okay, surely it's not gonna happen again." And on the second night, it happened again, and I was like, "Okay, I've got to figure something out. This cannot happen again tonight." And so my mom was cooking supper, and I knew I definitely didn't wanna tell my daddy because that person probably would not be alive right now. And so I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to mama. She'll be logical. She'll know what to do." And so I could not bring myself to say it out loud. And so I wrote it on a piece of paper, and I folded it up, and I handed it to her while she was cooking supper. And she read it, and she looked at me like, "What?" She said, "Who?" And I told her, and she said, "Where?" And I told her, and she immediately dropped everything she was doing, and she took me to the bathroom, and we talked about it. And also, I wanna say this person, was around the same age as me, and this had also happened to this person. So, I love this person so much. I do not hold any resentment or unforgiveness towards this person. I just wanted to say that. So, we went in the bathroom and we talked about it, and she said I was crying, and she was holding me, and she was apologizing, and she said, "You can sleep in my room tonight." And I said, "Okay." So I did. And I remember we were laying in the bed, and she was holding me, and I was crying, and she said something along the lines of, "If you want them to get in trouble, we can tell someone. But I need you to understand that if we tell someone, they're gonna get in a lot of trouble." And I said, "No, I don't want that." And so I slept in my mom's room probably for about a month or so. I don't remember the exact amount of time, but I remember it was so long that all of my friends and family were asking, "Why the heck are you sleeping in your mom's room every night?" And I mean, it was bad. Like, I had gotten anxiety. I was super paranoid. I would wake up in the middle of the night, all night, almost every night, just scared. And I had a little PlayStation, and I remember I would put my PlayStation under my pillow when I went to sleep, and if I woke up and if my PlayStation was gone, I would knew that someone had been near me while I was sleeping, and I would have a straight panic attack. Finally, I was like, "Okay, this is ridiculous because I'm obviously not gonna tell my friends what's going on, so I need to get back in my own room." And so I came up with a plan, and I said, "Okay, if I sleep with my door shut, then when someone tries to open my door, then I'll wake up and it'll be fine." It never happened again, and eventually I got better at sleeping at night and stuff like that. But even then, we didn't talk about it. It was like this little secret between me and my mom. It was just something that only me and her knew. So I remember there was one day my mom was sitting on the porch, and I went out there to sit with her, and I decided that I would try to talk about it. And this was maybe, it wasn't very long after it happened. I don't remember exactly how long, but I went out there and I said something. I don't remember what it was, but she said, "You know, baby, sometimes the devil will put something in your mind and it will feel really, really real. And it's not. And maybe that's what happened." And now, as an adult, I understand that she was trying to rationalize the situation, maybe. And she was probably honestly trying to make me feel better about it. But at that moment, it made me feel like she didn't believe me. And it made me feel very unheard. And I shut down after that. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't want to tell anyone anything. I didn't want to confide in anybody. I didn't want anybody around me because she was the only one in my life that I knew that I could trust. And at that moment, that was broken.
Yeah.
And so I remember after that was just a way downhill spiral for me. And so I started smoking weed. I started drinking because, and I can remember the first time I got drunk. I was standing on top of a truck actually. And I was just spinning in circles with my arm like this. And I said, "Can y'all feel that? I can breathe." I said, "I can finally breathe." And I just fell in love with it. And so I struggled with that for a while. And at this point, my brother Will, he had moved out and they lived right down the road. And so I would go there every day after school. I would just walk or run to their house because I was trying to be kind of healthy at that point in my life. And so I would run to their house and they would have parties all the time and stuff. And I would just hang out with them and I would smoke all the weed I wanted and drink anything I wanted and got involved with a lot of bad boys that hurt me pretty bad. And uh, because I just, at that point, I didn't see my worth at all. Like I thought
Mhm.
I was nothing and I didn't matter and my body didn't matter. And fast forward to probably my senior year. And I was like, okay, well, if my childhood kind of sucked, so maybe I can make my life better. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to go to college and I'm going to make a lot of money. And then I'll get married and I'll have a family and it'll be different for them. And so I took my SATs and everything. And I took a ASVAB as well because I thought that I could go into the military. They could pay for my school and everything would be good. And I passed both tests with flying colors, but I had tattoos on my neck and on my feet. And so they weren't really worried about the foot tattoos because I would have been wearing boots, but the ones on my neck I would have had to get removed and we were broke. So I couldn't afford that. And so that didn't work out. Well, I got accepted into nursing school, which they say that that's really rare as a freshman coming in to get accepted into nursing program your first year. And I did. And I was so excited. And I ran out the door when mom and daddy got home. And I showed them that I got accepted. And they just kind of brushed it off. And they were just like, yeah, that's cool. But I was expecting more. And it hurt my feelings pretty bad. And that just added to me feeling like I didn't matter and that nothing I could ever
Yeah.
do would be good enough.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that, that one event, the sexual abuse,
Mhm.
because things weren't brought out to the light, because it got swept under the rug, and because you felt so abandoned by your mother on the fact that she was trying to even say that maybe you imagined it,
Right.
you know, and because of all that, it kind of spurred on the getting into drinking and drugs and all of that. And I could see you trying to better your life, but you kept getting stopped
Down.
by,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to say that because it's so important that when you have sexual abuse happen in your life, it's so important to have it addressed and to have that darkness be brought into the light.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so then after you were going to get into the nursing program, tell us what happened after that.
Well, and this is actually kind of funny because I can remember my mom always said I was more of a parent to her because I can remember being like 8, 9, 10 years old and telling my mom, don't forget, file your taxes. You got to file them before April. But they did not file their taxes. And so I could not get any help with college. So I couldn't afford to go.
Okay.
So my cousins, one of my cousins is a doctor and his wife is a nurse, and they're doing really well financially. And so they decided that they would help me and that I could move to Florida with them, and they would help me figure out college and I could get a job down there. They helped me get a car, and man, they were such a blessing to me. But about a month before I went down there, I was dating this guy. We were dating maybe 2 or 3 years, and he was just really not good for me. And I thought I loved him. Looking back now, I know that I didn't. Don't get me wrong, I had love for him. We were together for a long time, but it was not get married and have kids type of love. And so, but about 2 weeks before we broke up, I had a dream about this guy that I had grown up with. His name was Jared. And in my dream, I'd never been to Jared's house before or anything like that. But in my dream, I went in his back door, through the living room, through the kitchen, down the hallway, into his room. And I looked and he was sitting on his bed, just staring at me, smiling. And I went in there and sat down on his bed next to him, laid my head on his shoulder, and then I woke up. I was like, "That's weird. I haven't talked to Jared in so long, so it's just a weird dream, whatever." So I went on about my business. About 2 weeks later, me and broke up, and Jared showed up at my house with my sister-in-law and her sister, and they were coming to pick up my brother. And Jared was so drunk, and I was like, "Oh, no." Because at this point, I had done decided I'm gonna be a nurse. I'm turning my life around. I'm not doing any of that anymore. I didn't smoke anymore. I didn't drink anymore. And so I was like, "Absolutely not." But he was like, "Come on, let me take you on a date. I heard y'all broke up." And I was like, "Mm-mm, no, sir." And I went inside and I went on about my business. But he reached out to me on social media and we were talking that way. And it maybe was like a week or 2, and I was like, "Okay, maybe we could go on a date. Like, what's the worst that could happen?" So, he came to the house and he met mama. Daddy was working a lot, so he met mama and talked to her a little bit, and we hung out at the house. He was like, "Okay, so can I take you on a date now?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, we can go on a date." Well, that he was supposed to come pick me up that night around 7, and he was late. He finally shows up and we go to his house and I walk in and I'm like, "No freaking way." It was identical to the dream. Even the comforter on his bed was the
Wow.
exact same. And so I can remember we were just hanging out. We were sitting on his bed and he went to hold my hand. And I remember when he touched my hand, it felt like fire. Like, I don't know how to explain it. And I'm not saying this sexually. I mean, like, there was something spiritual about it. And
Like a connection.
yeah, yeah. And ever since then, we've been together. But at that point in my life, I had been having nightmares from what happened when I was 12. And this was pre-saved, so y'all don't judge me, but I was staying the night with Jared, okay? And at nighttime, when I would wake up from these nightmares and I would be crying and shaking or whatever, and he would just hold me and it would all go away. And even before I knew the spiritual aspect or anything like that, he was such a gift to me. And which we'll get to that later, but he really helped. He really, really helped me in that season of my life to heal from that. So I did end up moving to Florida 2 weeks after I started dating Jared, and I moved to Florida, and we would see each other every weekend. I would either come home or he would come stay down there, and eventually, Jared got arrested one weekend, and I remember when it happened, I was at work, and I started crying because I knew he wasn't acting right before it happened. I knew he was acting like he was way out there, and he sent me a picture of him in the back of a police car, and he said, "I might be a little late this weekend." And I said, "Oh my
I
gosh, what is going on?" But I remember because for me, that was not normal for me. Like, my parents never had any run-in with the law. My daddy was good. He worked, he came home, paid the bills,
mhm,
that was it. There was
mhm.
no drinking, no drugs in my house. The only part of addiction that I saw growing up was my aunt. She was an alcoholic. And so I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I thought it was just a phase. I thought, okay, he's just young, he's partying, it's not a big deal. And I also had no idea, any idea about hard drugs. We
Yeah, so I'm sorry, so tell me, about Jared's addiction.
Yeah, so at this time, he was just dabbling in everything. He was just having a party. Every day was a party for him. So, but eventually he had a problem with meth and alcohol was pretty bad, but he would also take pills and stuff. But meth and pills and alcohol was his main
Okay.
thing.
Mhm. Just so you guys know, we're gonna have Jared on the podcast pretty soon, and he's gonna get to share his testimony and his side of this story as well.
Yeah,
So
I remember when he got arrested when I was in Florida. He was still living in Enigma, by the way, and he was supposed to come see me that weekend, and he was acting really weird, and I was like, even on my lunch break, I was like, "Jared, what is wrong with you? Like, maybe you don't need to travel today." And he got arrested for a DUI, and I remember I was shocked because I'd never dealt with that before, and so this was a big deal for me, like, this was end of the world type of stuff, okay? And so I had a freak out at work and I told them I had a family emergency. I had to go. So I left and I remember on the way down there, I was like, Lord, this is not the life I'm going to live. Like, this is not for me. What do I do? Because I love him. And I remember the Lord telling me, just stick with him, stick beside him. And I said, okay. And that day I went and bought my first pack of cigarettes. And I smoked that whole pack of cigarettes in one night, and I sat there because he was partying with my brother and my sister-in-law at that time in, like, their little group, and I sat down with them on the porch and I said, "Tell me everything." And they were trying to, like, tell me stuff without telling me stuff because, loyalty or whatever, and I'm like, "Will, I'm literally your sister, and I want to marry this man, and you're trying to keep stuff from me right now?" And, anyways, eventually he told me that Jared was on meth and they would be staying up for days at a time and stuff like that, and I had no idea. Like, I was so young. I was 18 at the time, and I was so oblivious to any of this. Like, this was a whole new world for me. And so, I mean, I had smoked pot, I had drank drinks, but hard drugs, that's a whole other ballgame. And so I ended up going and getting Jared out of jail, and I took him home, and I went back to Florida. Well, within the next 2 weeks, my brother Michael had overdosed once, they had to bring him back to life 2 or 3 times, and my brother Will had hallucinated, and he had gotten into a really, really bad car accident, and my sister-in-law was in the car as well as her niece, and her niece was in the car seat, but the car seat was not buckled to the car. And they flipped, and Kirsten's leg went through the windshield. Thankfully, her niece was okay, but Kirsten had gotten injured pretty badly. She cut her leg really deep on the windshield. And so at this point, I was not sleeping because I was horrified of what was gonna happen next. And I was in Florida, and, they didn't they didn't understand really what I was going through. And I didn't feel like I could tell them because at this point, I still don't trust anybody. I'm still dealing with my own baggage. And so I start arguing with them. And, my cousin, he's like, I know you're partying because you're not gonna be around all that and not do it too." And I said, "I do not party. Like, that's not my thing. I have no desire whatsoever to do that." And so we got into it about that, and then they found out I was smoking cigarettes, and we got into it about that, and they didn't like Jared for very obvious reasons. And at that point, I was head over heels for Jared, and nobody could tell me anything. So I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna go back home." So I did. And he came and got me, and even the day he came and got me to take me home, he didn't get there till midnight. And so we pack everything up in the back of his truck, and I go back to Enigma with him. And at this point, I am in a really, really bad mental state. I'm paranoid. I'm hallucinating because I'm not sleeping because I'm worried about what's going to happen next. And I've just cut off a very important part of my family. And for Jared, my parents are upset because they didn't want me to leave. They wanted me to stay down there. So pretty much it's me against my entire family at this point, except for my
Right.
brothers, of course, because they're high and they don't care what happens, you know? And so, yeah, I go back to Enigma. I move in with Jared and his parents. And within the first week, we get into a huge fight because at this point, I still don't understand that he has a bad problem. And he was trying to leave to go somewhere without me, and I wanted to go with him. And so we got in a fight about that. And that was probably one of our biggest fights that we had ever been in, downhill from there, for sure. And he was constantly going missing, and he would pop back up a day or 2 later, and I ended up getting pregnant. I was working at Publix at the time. My mom was also working at Publix. She got me a job there. I'm sorry, mama. It was just very unstable, so unstable. I just was not dependable at all, and I had always been very, very dependable. Like, I was a good worker. But at this point, I was so busy trying to keep up with Jared that I just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
So, I ended up getting pregnant with Joseph, and I thought that Jared would be excited, and instead, he thought I was tricking him, and then when he realized I was not playing a joke on him, he left, and he came back a couple hours later, and that was probably, at that season in our life, the worst 8 months of our relationship because he was on breakdown mode
Mhm.
because he had a bad childhood because his parents were on drugs, and now he's on drugs, and now he's gonna give that to his son, so you can only imagine what was going through his mind and why he went as far down as he did at that time. And
Yeah.
he had no foundation. I had my granny taught me about Jesus and stuff. He had no foundation really.
Mhm.
So, he was taught that drugs and alcohol, that was a normal way of life.
Mhm.
I remember one night when I was pregnant, I was working at the watermelon shed, and I worked really late, and at this point in time, me and Jared had kinda split up, but not really. I would do that every now and then to try to scare him into getting sober. And so I went over to his house to stay with him that night, and I was trying to go to sleep, and I could not sleep. Like, every time I would close my eyes, I would see scary stuff. But there was something about Jared for me that when I touched him, I didn't see that stuff. And so I cuddled up real close to him, and I was trying to fall asleep, and I looked in the hallway, and there was a light on in the hallway. And I saw these 3 figures in the hallway, and it was these, like, black silhouettes, and the one in the middle had a cowboy hat on, which will be significant later. And the one in the middle with the cowboy hat on, he was a little bit taller than the other 2, on either side of him, and he just threw his head back laughing. And I remember thinking, "What the heck is he laughing at?" And I didn't hear this audibly, but I heard it in my mind. And now this is the crazy part because demons can't hear your thoughts, right? But I think they can because he said, "You're too late. He's ours now. You can't save him." And then I immediately, as soon as I heard that, I put my hands on Jared and I started praying. And I pled the blood of Jesus over him, and this was before I even knew anything about that.
Mhm.
But even after that, nothing changed. But that's just how the devil gets in your mind to try to trick you into thinking people are a lost cause.
Yeah.
And so, but there were so many times where I wanted to give up and I just couldn't. I couldn't because I saw the good in Jared and I knew what a good man he could be and what a good dad he could be. And so after Joe was born, he was about 2 or 3 months old. We ended up moving to Macon with Jared's brother because we decided that if we could get out of that town, then Jared could change and everything would be good. Also, I just want to say Jared was not the whole problem. I brought a lot of baggage into this relationship. Like I had a lot of trust issues. I was paranoid. He definitely didn't help the situation, but he was not the only problem. So I just don't want y'all to sit here and think that I'm dogging Jared because I'm really not. This is just part of our story. So
Mhm.
we moved to Macon and about he was sober for a good while. But with him being sober, we turned into much more of roommates than a couple, and we were not married at this time. And I was so insecure because I found my worth in if someone wants to have sex with me or not, honestly, or if someone wants to show me affection. And so since he didn't feel like doing any of that, I thought that he didn't love me. And so I went my mom was in Atlanta at the time because my dad was working out of town. They had an apartment up there. So I called my mom and I said, I'm coming to stay with you for a few days. And so I did. And as soon as I left, Jared left and he went back to Enigma. And he went MIA for a little while, maybe like 2 or 3 days. And at this point, I don't know how long he had been sober, maybe 2 or 3 months. And I come back or he comes to Atlanta to get me, I think. And we go back to Josh's, and Jared is out there. Like, he is high, high. And we talked about it. He did good for a little while, but then he started drinking again. And then, well, he started smoking weed again first. Then he started drinking again. And then after about 10 months, someone had introduced him back to meth. And so I got pregnant with Addie, our second child, while we were in Macon. And I really didn't wanna leave Macon, but Jared was about to start working out of town, and so everybody was like, "You're gonna have 2 kids now, you need help, you need to move back to Enigma." And at the time, I didn't want to, but I felt like they were kinda right, and so I did. Looking back now, I don't know if that was a mistake or not, but it kinda felt like a mistake. And so, anyways, I moved back to Enigma. Jared was working out of town. It just got worse and worse and worse, way worse. And I could tell you 50 million stories between then and now, but I'm going to fast forward to 2022 when my friend Madison, one of my best friends, she came to the house to see our third child, Abigail. And I just wanna say, she got saved maybe a year or so before this, but she was always the most loving, loving person I have ever met. Even at her worst times, I have never, ever seen her be hateful or anything like she is just an amazing person. She is such a blessing to me. And at this time, she had come back to the church maybe a year or so before I had Abigail. I'm not sure on that timeline, but she came to the house to see Abigail, and she was telling us about this thing that they do on Monday nights at her church called Unchained. And so she was like, "Y'all should come," and I was like, "Yeah, sure. Jared will never go to that." And so Jared was like, "Yeah, okay," and we just kinda brushed it off, but a couple weeks later, Jared was like, "Do you wanna go to Unchained?" at Madison's church. And I was like, heck yeah, I do. And I was like, hurry up and get in the car before you change your mind. And so it was actually on our anniversary, our 6-year anniversary. And so we went to Unchained and we liked it. And then they were having a conference the next week called the Love Conference. And it was where they have it's like a 5-day event and they have all these guest speakers and stuff. And Jared was like, yeah, we can go to it. And I was like, okay, awesome. And so me and Madison automatically started getting together and we were like, okay, he needs to get up there to this speaker. He needs to get up there to this speaker. And so we came up with a plan. And so on the first night of the Love Conference, the person who was speaking, his name was Dean Sykes. And he's like a prophet evangelist. I don't know the exact term, but Madison was like, that's the one you want to get him to. And I said, okay. So we got there and I walk in the church, and this is the biggest church I've ever been to in my life. I mean, I was raised in little bitty Enigma, Georgia, and like little bitty small backwoods churches. And this was huge. And I just looked at Jared like, what in the world are we doing? And so we walk in and I can immediately feel the Holy Spirit. I mean, like, I got goosebumps. It was crazy. And I was like, oh, wow. And so we find a seat somewhere in the back with Madison, and Dean gets up and he starts speaking. And everything he's saying is just everything that we need to hear, right? And he said something along the lines of, if you need God to move a mountain, I need y'all to get to the front right now. And so I look at Jared and I look at Madison and we all shoot to the front. And so we end up in the very front of the church. And if you know Jared is not a spotlight type of dude. And he's very, very shy, very quiet. But we were in the very front under the spotlight, right? And so it was Madison, Jared, and me. And he's going down the line and he's praying over people and stuff, and people are just falling out. And I'm looking at Jared and Jared's looking at me, and I'm like, oh, what is about to happen? And so he gets to Madison and he prays for her, and then he gets to Jared and he's like, cut the music. He cuts the music off. I
Wow.
mean, it's dead quiet in there. And he looks at Jared and he's asking him some questions. And then he looks at me and he says, who is she to you? And Jared said, that's my wife. And he looks at me and he said, what's your heart's biggest desire? And I started crying and I said, for him to be sober. And Dean looked at Jared and he said, do you want that? And Jared said, yeah. And Dean said, are you sure you want that? And Jared said, yeah. And looking back now, I know it's because you got to go through some things to get there.
Yeah.
And anyways, he said some other things to us, but that whole week was Jared went the first night. He went a couple nights, but I went every single night because after that I was hooked. I was like, I'm into this Jesus thing.
Yeah.
And that whole week for me personally was so transformative. I mean, I was delivered from anxiety, depression, pills, all kinds of stuff. Because after I had Abigail, I forgot to say this, but after I had Abigail, I got postpartum anxiety really bad. And they prescribed me a whole bunch of medication. They prescribed me a whole bunch of medication when I was pregnant with Abigail and to sleep and stuff because I was put on bed rest because my body was allergic to her and it just was not happy. And so when I got saved, that first night while Dean was there, I accepted Jesus into my heart and I got saved. And then over the next 4 or 5 nights, it was just full deliverance every night. And most of the time, that looked like people just encouraging me, people just loving on me and holding me while I cried and just speaking words of life into me because I was suicidal. I was addicted to pills. I had no hope. Like, I just remember being at home, taking all these pills. I was taking pills like every 1 to 2 hours. And I just remember thinking, there's no way out for me. Like, this is gonna be my life for the rest of my life. This is gonna be my children's life for the rest of their life, and there is nothing I can do to fix it. And something that my pastor said during that night at the love conference was she said, "You are not the savior, you're the believer. You cannot
Okay.
save him, but you can believe for God to save him." And so ever since then, I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and I was filled with so much fire for the word of God. And so that was what I did 24/7, even at work. I either had the Bible playing in my ear, I had Joyce Meyer in my ear, I had praise and worship in my ear, and then every time I wasn't busy, I was reading the Bible. And I remember I started in Psalms, and then I went to Proverbs, and then I just went on from there, and I would write down every single promise in the Bible that I found. I would write it down, I would put it on my wall, and there was this bathroom in our house. It was the guest bathroom that Jared had started working on, and he never finished it, and so it didn't work. So I made that my prayer closet. And every night I would spend an hour or 2 in there, and I would just write, read, pray, worship, all the things. I started praying over my home. I started proclaiming that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and we have a future, and we have hope in Jesus, and He's gonna turn our life around. And I remember the first time I started journaling, the Lord told me, He said, "If you stick with me, a year from now, your life will not even be recognized." And I
Mm.
said, "Oh, heck yeah, I'm sticking with you then." And I did. And the craziest thing is we always pray like, "Lord, change my circumstances. I'm tired of feeling like this. I'm tired of dealing with this." But I remember having so much peace and joy before he changed one thing in my life. And that was just by having a relationship with him.
Right.
And so there was a while there that nothing changed at all. Nothing changed until about a month or 2 before the year was up, because he's a suddenly
Wow.
kinda God.
Right. Right.
So there's this man that goes to church with us. His name is John. His wife's name is Sheila. They are such a blessing to us. And I remember I was having dinner with one of the ladies from church one night, and she said, "Yeah, my husband used to work for John at A Action Air. He kinda takes in people who are in recovery, and he gives them a job, and he teaches them, he mentors them." I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool." At this point, Jared was not even thinking about doing better. So she was like, maybe Jared should be with John." And I just brushed it off. I was like, "No, that's stupid. It's not gonna happen." And then maybe 2 or 3 months later, I was sitting in church, and the pastor was preaching, and I felt the Lord tell me, John and Sheila were actually sitting right behind us in church. And we were both that day sitting in spots that we would never normally sit. And I heard the Lord say, "Jared's supposed to be working with John." And I said, "Hmm." And I just couldn't shake it. And I was like, "Okay." And the Lord told me to talk to them after church. Well, the church ends, and Jared makes a beeline for the door, and then John also makes a beeline for the door. So I looked at Mama Sheila and I said, "Hey, I feel like the Lord told me that my husband's supposed to work with your husband." And so, anyways, long story short, Jared did start working with John. And there was maybe a month or 2 after he started working there. And also, a funny part to this story was one day, Jared went to work at John's house to clean John's windows. And Jared was cleaning John's windows, and Jared came home and he said, "He's got a fridge in his garage." And I said, "What?" I was like, "What kind of rich stuff is that?" I said, "He's got a fridge in his garage." I said, "Was there beer in it?" And Jared said, "No." And I remember us being so shocked that somebody had a fridge in their garage and there was no beer in it. And, but anyways, so he ended up losing his job at A Actionaire, but a couple months, maybe I don't remember how long it was after he lost his job, I felt the Lord telling me that I was supposed to work at A Actionaire. So I applied. John took a chance on me and he hired me. And I have been there ever since. So there was one day that John came in and he said, "Are you ready to get out?" And I said, "Ooh." And I said, I really wanted to say, probably not, but John's a very bold, straightforward kind of guy. And so I was like, yeah, I'm ready. And so he was like, "Here's a check." He handed me a blank check. He said, "Go find you somewhere today." And I said, "Okay." At this point, Jared was probably the worst I had ever seen him. He was not Jared at all. We were constantly fighting and screaming at each other in front of the kids, like there was just no peace in our home whatsoever.
He was still using and
Yeah, he was still using, he was drinking liquor all the time, and it was just really, really bad. Very mentally abusive, and it was bad, and the kids were experiencing all of this. And I just remember praying like, "Lord, please, please don't let my kids remember this." And Joe was probably 5 at the time. I'm actually getting ahead of myself because before I started working at A Actionaire, there was one night where I was in the bathtub. I was pregnant. I was probably 7 months pregnant or so. I mean, I was huge. And Jared was working out of town, and I said, "Lord, what do I do?" And I'm texting Jared these 5-minute paragraphs about, "I just want you to love me. I just want you to talk to me. Like, what's going on? I don't understand. Blah, 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 blah." Like a broken record. The same things I've said to him a million times before, and it still didn't do anything. And so I was in the bathtub and I was crying and I was like, "Lord, what do I do?" And the Lord said, "I can't fix him because you keep saving him." And I said, "Oh, because I'm always getting him out of every situation." And
yep.
so that night, I was like, "Okay, Lord, he's all yours. I'm done with it." And he actually ended up wrecking my car that night. My brand new 2021 Toyota Camry, and I loved that car. But he ended up wrecking the car, and then his friend Manny set it on fire, and then, it
Dear.
was a mess. So yeah, Jared called me, or Manny actually is the one who called me the next morning. He was like, "Have you seen Jared?" And I'm like, "You're in a whole 'nother state. Why would I have seen Jared?" And so, anyways, it was a big mess, and Jared was asking me to help him, and I said, "No, I'm not gonna help you. I love you." I said, "You can come home, but I'm not gonna get you out of this." And so, um, yeah, he ended up coming home. That was when he started with A Actionaire, not long after that. And John handed me the check, and I went to find a house. And we actually, the only one that we could find was a little bitty single wide that was absolutely terrible. But I knew that it was temporary. And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, let's do it." So the landlord
Mm.
knew the whole situation because he was one of my friend's dads. And he was like, "Well, you just let me know by Sunday what you want to do." Because he knew that I was still kind of on the fence about it. He said, "You let me know by Sunday what you want to do." And I said, "Okay." Well, I went home that night and everything was fine. Saturday night, he had stayed out all night. And then Sunday morning, I woke up really early. It was probably like 6:30, and he was on the back porch. And I texted him and I said, "Can you come in here, please? I need to talk to you." And he came in and I said, "I need to talk to you and I need you to listen." I said, "I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to listen." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "Me and the kids are leaving and I need you to let us go." And he said, "Okay." And he got up and he walked out. But he didn't believe that it was actually gonna happen. So that day I went to church, he didn't go with us, and right after church, I went and signed the lease, and I had it in my car, and that night, he was really sweet, really kind because he thought that would make us stay. He didn't know I'd already signed a lease. And he got in my car to go to the store real quick, and he saw the lease. And he comes in the house, and he is absolutely insane. He throws me down on the bed. He gets on top of me. He starts shaking me. He said, "You think you're going to take my kids? You think you're going to go somewhere? Blah, 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 blah." So I was horrified. Honestly, he has never, ever put his hands on me at this point, ever. The worst he had ever done to me was throwing something at me and missed every time. So this was like very scary for me. And I got up the next morning, I went to work, and I was at work, and I told him, I said, "I need to leave early. Like, I need to leave today because of what happened last night. I cannot go home tonight. So I need to go get my stuff now before the kids get out of school because I don't know what's going to happen." And so I went to get my stuff, and the whole way there, I'm crying because I'm so scared. And I'm praying. I said, "Lord, just soften his heart. Just soften his heart. Just soften his heart." And I get there, and it's him and his friend there at our home, which his granddaddy had bought for us, which was just a double wide trailer, but I absolutely loved it. And I get there, and he's helping me load everything up. And he said, "I don't even know why I'm doing this right now. Why am I helping you right now?" And I'm thinking, I know why you're helping me right now.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, we all I could fit in the car was a mattress and a couple toys for the kids and my clothes and their clothes. And I didn't even get all of my clothes. And that's what we moved into the house with, a mattress. We all sleep on one mattress. All the clothes are piled in the rooms, and that was all we had. And
Wow.
we were perfectly content. It was the first time in years that I had had peace.
Yeah.
But it was never ever for me. It was never, "I'm leaving, I'm gonna get a divorce, and I'm gonna find somebody else." I just wanna make that clear. It was never like that for me. I never lost hope or faith that Jared would come around.
Well, I just want
So
to say, Katie, that this was, your coming to Jesus moment,
mhm.
and the moment that you stopped being codependent, the moment that you stopped enabling
Yeah.
his addictions.
Yeah,
And
100%.
yeah, I mean, so this is where you started becoming healthy,
Mhm.
having healthy boundaries, healthy actions. And as we're going to see, it was the turnaround for your entire life.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, what happened after that?
We were on our own for maybe a month or so, and Jared was constantly blowing up my phone. Thankfully, I didn't have Wi-Fi there, and I had no service out there. Even if I did give in and answer the phone would break up, and it would end up
Hmm.
disconnecting anyway. So even if I wanted to
Hmm.
talk to him, I couldn't. So it was really anointed
Hmm.
that way.
Yeah.
Anyways, finally, he texts me and he says, "I'm going out of town. I'm going out of town to work with my cousins. Do you need anything from the house? Blah, blah, blah." And I said I needed the Wi-Fi router. He said, "Well, can I bring it to you before I go?" And I was very hesitant to give him my address because at this point, if there was a storm outside, I was having nightmares about him breaking into the house. And so I did not want him to know where I was. And also because I didn't trust myself to hold those boundaries. But anyways, I did end up giving him the address and he came. And, him and his cousins, which I felt better that they were there because I knew he wasn't gonna act too crazy in front of people. And so he comes in the house, and like I said, this is not a nice trailer whatsoever. He said something along the lines of, "Are you serious? You left our home for this? You live in a dang trap house right now." And I was like, and I'm happy. I was telling him, "Don't get crazy in front of the kids." And so finally, I asked his cousins to sit with the kids for a minute, and we went into my room and talked. And we were just talking about everything. He was like, "I don't understand." He really honestly did not understand my thought process whatsoever because he didn't see what I could see. When I got saved, I automatically had this knowing of this is not a normal life and this is not the life that I'm going to live. And he hadn't had that revelation yet. And so he was very genuinely confused. He had no idea what was going on because he was still so lost.
Mhm.
So, anyways, I was explaining everything to him, and he was like, "I do not like yellow light bulbs in my house. I have to have the bright LED light bulbs." And he was basically like, "Even the light bulbs are yellow. Like, what are you doing here?" And
Oh, man.
I was like, "I love it here. It's peaceful here." And so we talked about that. And then he was like, "Why can't y'all just come home? Just come home, please. I miss y'all." And I said, "No, absolutely not." And he said that he needed to tell me something. And he showed me a spot on his arm where he had shot up for the first time. And I immediately lost it because this whole 10-year journey, the only thing I had to stand on was Jared has not started IV using yet, so he still has hope. Because I'd always heard that once you do that, it's there's like little to no chance of coming back. Now that I'm saved, I know that that's not true. Jesus can save everybody, but at that
Right.
point in my life, it was like if he starts doing that, and I had always told him, I said, "Jared, if you ever start shooting up, I'm telling you."
Kind of like the
So
point of no return.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, he showed me that and I lost it. I started crying. I said, "Jared, if you will go to rehab, I promise you, no matter what, me and the kids will be by your side." And he said, "For real?" And I said, "Duh." And he said, "Okay, I'll go." And I said, "Okay." So he gave his cousins his phone, his keys, the car, everything. He said, "Go. I'm staying here."
Mhm.
So he did, and then I called my pastor the next day. My pastors helped us find a good rehab in Atlanta, and they actually wrote us a check without even asking questions. They were like, "Here's the check. Take them up there. We support y'all." It's such a blessing when you have a village that will just stand beside you. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. Any other church probably would have called defects on us the first 2 weeks we started attending that church. I'm not playing. It was bad. But and don't get me wrong, they're not just overlooking things, but they just I cannot explain how much love and encouragement that church has poured into not just me, but Jared as well and our kids. The Lord bringing us to covenant is probably the number one blessing that we have ever had in our life. They wrote the check and everything's good. You know, you can tell he's kind of scared to go. But at this point, I'm like, yeah, he's definitely going to go. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that he's not going to go.
Mhm.
So it comes to the day where I'm going to take him to rehab. We woke up late. He missed his ride up there, which was strike one. So it's 4 a.m. We're loading up the car with the kids and we head up there. It's about a 3-hour drive or so. It's up there in Atlanta. And so we get about halfway there and I stop and I get some breakfast and he's sleeping the whole time. I can tell he's freaking out a little bit. And so I get him some breakfast. I wake him up. I hand it to him. I get the kids some breakfast and I get back on the road. So we get about 20, 30 minutes away and his cousin calls him, which is the one that he's been acting a fool with while I've been gone. And so his cousin's just talking to him. Everything's fine. And DJ says, "So you're really going to go?" And then at that moment, it was like a switch just flipped in Jared's mind, and he went berserk. He threw the drink across the car. He threw his plate across the car. He said, "Turn this car around right now. I'm not going." And I'm like, I'm in shock because up until now, he was like, I could tell he was a little hesitant, but I thought that was normal. You know, you're going to have nerves when you're about to change your entire life. But
Yep.
it was bad. And then I was like, no, I'm dropping you off. I said, you can find someone to come pick you up, but I'm leaving you in Atlanta at that rehab. I said, I'm not taking you back. You definitely are not going home with me.
Mhm.
And then he ripped up the check. And that was the part for me because it felt like, okay, I definitely can't drop him off now because how am I going to pay for it? And it also felt so disrespectful to these people who had taken me in and loved on us and encouraged us and believed in Jared. That was the last straw for me. Honestly, I acted a fool. I don't know how we got
Yeah.
back down here safely because I don't even remember driving. I stopped on brakes in the middle of the road in Atlanta
Oh,
with my 3 children in the car. I completely stomped on brakes to a halt, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't have a voice. I just turned around. I said, "I'm taking you home. I'm done." I said, "Don't ever call me again. Don't talk to me again. I want a divorce. I am done." Like, at this point, I had lost all hope. That was it for me. And so I dropped him off at the house, and I said, "You better hope these blankety blanks are at this house when I get here." And he said, "Don't say nothing to them. It's not their fault." I said, I don't care whose fault it is." I said, I was so angry. I was going to take it out on anybody I could.
mhm.
We get there. Thankfully, no one is there. And I drop him off and I go inside and there's just drugs everywhere. There's drugs everywhere. The front door's open, the back door's open. And this was our home. Like, this was our family home. And so he's sitting there trying to beg me to stay. And I said, "Jared, have you lost your mind? I do not want to be with you. Like, I have no will or want to be with you whatsoever right now. You're the last person I want to be around." And so I get in the car and I leave. Everybody's blowing up my phone. Everybody knows that something's wrong because they can't get a hold of me. And I get back home, and the rest of the day is a pity party. And I'm just totally in this victim mindset. And the next day I wake up and I'm good. I'm like, there's still hope. Everything's good. I just needed a minute. And still not talking to Jared, still not having anything to do with him. About 2 weeks go by and he comes back. And he says, "I'm serious. I'm ready to go this time." And I said, "Okay." And he stayed. And one of our good friends from church, Matt, his wife, her name is Eden, helps to run Kids Town at the church. And we're really close with them. And Matt was also in recovery. And he went to a rehab out of Garfield, Georgia called New Beginnings in Christ. And he was like, "I really think Jared would like it. I'll take him over there and he can check it out. That way, maybe he won't be so nervous next time." And I said, "Okay, yeah, that would be awesome." So Matt took a whole day, drove Jared 3 hours away, introduced him to everybody. Jared loved it. But the thing there was that you have to be able to pass a drug test before you can get in. And he had all kinds of stuff in his system. And so it was probably about a month or so before he could pass a drug test. And then we had to wait on a bed to open up. Long story short, everything worked out. He ended up going to rehab the same exact day a year later that we got saved. And I remember I was so scared to go see him because I was like, I don't want to go see him because what if he tries to leave? And so I didn't go see him for a couple months after he got in there. It was only a 4-month program. But I remember the first time I went to see him, I could see his whole countenance was changed. He had a light in his eyes, his skin looked good. He was just a completely different man than the last time I had saw him. And everything's been great ever since. The Lord blessed us with a home, nicest house we've ever lived in. Nothing that we did, we didn't have the money for it, and He made a way, you know? And, so yeah, it's just the Lord has just really been taking care of us and loving on us, and we are so blessed. Seriously. Our whole life is a full 180 from what it was.
Wow. So Jared has been clean ever since. He's been
Yep.
growing in the Lord and as a person. You guys work together at the company that you work for. So, gosh, it's just such a blessing to see what God has done in your life. I know there's people watching are going through the same thing that you went through. So, what would you say to them in their moment that they're going through this?
I would say hold on to the promises of God. You need to go in the Bible. You need to pick out every single one that you can. You need to write it down. You need to allow God to write that promise on your heart because the only thing that you have is faith. It's so important to know the plans that God has for you
Yeah.
because we have to stop looking at the physical. If we want our lives to change, we cannot look at what it looks like right now. We have to speak to our life and we have to use our authority and we have to tell it to change. We have to believe that it can change.
Mhm.
That was really the number one thing was just having a relationship with God and holding on to His promises and knowing and believing that He would do what He said He was going to do.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, exactly. And throughout this whole process, you guys getting saved, you getting into the word, the Lord was able to heal your heart and your family situation from the sexual abuse from your childhood,
Yeah.
right? So just a complete transformation in your life.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and personally, I mean, I kind of had a somewhat front row seat to all of it because I was talking to your mom, my sister, on a
Yeah.
regular basis about you.
I bet that was wild.
And yeah, it was pretty crazy. But, you had a praying mama and a praying
Yeah.
auntie. And so I know that helped too. But yeah,
Yeah.
so we're just so thrilled and happy to see what God's done.
Maybe we can get Jared on here to tell his testimony. It's so powerful.
Mhm. We
Stay tuned
definitely
for
will.
that.
Amen. Yeah, for sure. So anyway, but I just wanted to thank you, Katie, for being so open and vulnerable with your story. And I know it's blessed a lot of people. So just thank you, everyone, for being on another episode with us of Becoming. God bless y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Oh, no, I said y'all.
Yeah.
We're
Oh, my